Welcome to CASA Presents Your Mental Health. I'm Leslie McDonald, and I'm your moderator for this COVID-19 special webcast series. Our host is CASA Child, Adolescent, and Family Mental Health. This is a respected not-for-profit organization that's been around for more than 30 years in Alberta, providing assessments, treatment services for infants, children, and their families. For 3 years now, the folks at CASA have been sharing their vast network of expertise and resources through the Dr. Roger Bland Lecture Series. During this pandemic, we bring that full discussion online, giving you reliable and accurate information to inspire conversation, hope, and wisdom. We want to give special thanks to Alberta Health for making this series possible. We also want to thank our ongoing partners, Edmonton Public Schools, the Institute for Health Economics, and the University of Alberta Department of Psychiatry. We also want to acknowledge Global Edmonton for their partnership in this monthly series. Now, the format is quite simple. We're going to be speaking with an expert about the subject, and then we're going to bring in another panel of different experts. This month, the topic is checking in 1 month into the classroom. And we have to say that we've been talking about the new normal, but it is anything but. We're going to be joined shortly by a principal and 2 parents with very different experiences. But first, our special guest, Dr. Peter Silverstone. Dr. Silverstone is the interim chair for the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Alberta. He trained in medicine at the University of London in England and has been an active researcher in several areas of mental health. He's trained police in de-escalation techniques and has over 140 peer-reviewed publications to his credit. He's designed programs for reducing suicides among students in Red Deer and programs dealing with PTSD, anxiety, and other issues in Fort McMurray after their huge fire. His current focus is on children, youth, and e-mental health initiatives, and we're so delighted to have you here, Dr. Silverstone. Thank you. Dr. Drhinshaw, our Chief Medical Officer of Health, called COVID one of the most significant public health challenges we've faced in several generations. And certainly, I think it's fair to say this is probably one of the toughest back-to-school years in modern history. What's been your experience with that, your perspective?
So I think that's the reality, Leslie. It's an issue because there's so much uncertainty. And uncertainty, of course, increases mental health problems. So I won't spend too long going over what's obvious to everybody who is taking part, but there's been uncertainty about would schools open, how will they open, in what format will they open, what will happen if someone gets sick. They're just continuous uncertainty. Plus, of course, for the families, uncertainties about jobs, the economy, what's going to happen, worries about their own health, the extended family health. And so all of these things lead to mental health stresses. And that is sadly impacting school environments, which is not a surprise, and families of those who are helping their children get back to schools, as well as the wider community. And I know you'll hear about some people dealing with some of those issues, but the evidence to date does seem to show that mental health problems are increasing. They're increasing in frequency, and we really have to think about what we can do to try and increase the resilience and decrease negative outcomes over the following few months.
You know, let's talk a bit about what the evidence is. And it does seem to be a lot more prevalent with young people feeling anxious and having more of that kind of experience. What's the evidence on that, and where do we think that's going?
So we did a study in Red Deer Public Schools a few years ago, and we found, really to my surprise, that between 20 and 30% of all students, grade 6 to grade 12, have significant anxiety. So there's already a background of anxiety that's very real, as well as some depression and significant mood symptoms. And those by far are the commonest mental health issues that kids have, although of course there are other things too. When you submit groups to stress, and we found this out in Fort McMurray, where we did further studies after the fire, those rates go up. And perhaps it's not surprising. You have a stressor, people become more anxious, their mood goes down. The worrying thing for us in Fort McMurray was that these rates didn't come down straight away. In fact, they remained high for quite a long time. And our concern, although we haven't done the studies yet, our concern is that kind of response is what we'll be seeing in COVID, that this multiple stresses from different directions will increase anxiety rates. Often that shows itself as behavioral problems in school or at home, and also can change mood, and that can also show itself in a number of areas. So for parents of kids going back to school, these are very real problems. And of course, there's the second group of parents whose kids are not back in school because they have concerns. And so they are taking on roles they didn't have to do before. So there's just a very complex situation right now.
You learned a lot doing those various programs that you designed. What did you learn that could be applied here?
So that was the interesting part, is that we were able to make some changes, positive changes. And it turns out that a variety of steps can make a difference. Obviously, you have to try and reduce anxiety, but that doesn't mean denying that there's a problem. But structure makes a difference for children. There's no question of that. Obviously, age-appropriate structure makes a difference. Being open about things, but not causing anxiety. Sometimes hard as a parent of teenage children in particular, as to how much you do share and how much you don't share. Recognizing that children's behavior patterns will reflect their anxieties, often in ways you don't like. We used to talk a lot about reducing time on social media. We're doing that less now because people are maintaining contacts, but we all know that this can be an issue in terms of too much social media time. One of the things that does seem to help, no surprise, is exercise. It's something we often forget, but how do you structure exercise into a day for a child? Younger children is actually often quite easy. You can do games, jumping jacks, Simon says, build exercise into games can be very effective. With teenage children, that's more problematic, but do really think about how you and your family might want to build something in to try and enhance exercise levels, because exercise is extremely effective at helping mitigate the risks of anxiety and depression. And then there's a variety of different talk therapies and other supports that are available. If you are worried, one of the things to do is do reach out to your primary healthcare providers, because there are resources there.
Well, this is really quite unique in that it's not just one family that's going through difficulty, or it's everyone is having difficulty in this. Everyone is dealing with a really extreme challenge in all of this and trying to cope. So when you have that kind of thing all happening at once, that has the potential to be quite explosive.
Yes, and again, I'll come back to Fort McMurray, where everybody experienced the same trauma at the same time. Uh, but the difference between that and other sort of disasters is the fact that there's the disaster, and then you design programs to try and help people move on from it. Not always successfully, but you can do that. Whereas now it's just ongoing, and that chronic sense of uncertainty is really what's going to be an issue. And then what happens, if your school or your class or somebody is exposed, or tests, particularly as rates go up. And so really, I think the key is to start thinking about, okay, what can I do to increase the resiliency of myself and my family and my children, so that we do have as much structure as possible, and that we do have plans for, okay, if this happens, if our child can't go to school, or if there's someone they know becomes sick, what are we going to do and how are we going to cope? Or if you're not at school at the moment, how can I teach? What is the minimum amount of teaching required? I think the other thing that'll turn out to be very interesting is that we tend to cram kids' days with time in educational activities. But I'm not sure that as much time is required as we believe. So, for example, if you think about going to school and the child is at school for many hours, you don't need to replicate that. All of that time is not spent learning and concentrating. And in fact, if you say and focus, okay, let's do 15 or 20-minute spurts of concentration, that's not a bad thing to do. Giving your child there's lots of online tutorials for mindfulness or cognitive behavior therapy to try and help focus them, but recognize that realistic, short and focused times can be very helpful. And don't think, okay, because they're in a school for all these hours, they need to be as focused as possible.
I know one of the things that's probably going through the minds of a lot of parents right now is they're thinking about their kids who have to sit through 3 hours of instructions with one short break, which, you know, we're going to talk about the mental versus the physical aspects to this COVID. But it's a challenge to sit there for that long a period of time and maintain that focus.
Well, nobody can. The evidence is very clear. The reason I'm using 20 minutes is that most people can maintain concentration for about 20 minutes, unless it's a particularly good movie or something that really engages you, like video games specifically designed to continually arouse your attention and keep you kind of locked in. But for most activities, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes is the most, whether you're a child or an adult. And so I don't think we should be unrealistic and say, well, you know, it's 3 hours, here's what you're going to do. But look and say, okay, let's try and keep focus for 20 minutes. Let's think about how we can have a break. And whether or not you're in class, then you can say, okay, you can help work with your child to say, while you're in class, try and do 10, 15, 20-minute periods of focusing. Give yourself a mental break for a few minutes to refresh, and then come back. I'm not pretending to teach. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not giving teaching guides. I'm just talking about the way our concentration works. If you're at home, you should not be focusing on long periods of concentration because it's just not realistic.
Mm-hmm. We're going to come back to this theme, but I'd like to introduce our next guest. Brad Burns is the principal at Victoria School for the Arts, a kindergarten through grade 12 international baccalaureate school in Edmonton. He has been for 28 years. You have experience teaching visual arts and theater, and I'm so pleased to have you join us here, Brad. A month ago, the Alberta Teachers Association released a survey, and this was actually, I think, quite shocking to most of us. Up to 95% of teachers reported extreme and unsustainable levels of fatigue, stress, and anxiety. Wow. Where are we now from your experience, from what you've seen? Where are we now a month later?
A month later, I would say that that report is probably still accurate, although there is a sense of calm because we got through that first day, and then that second day, and then that first week, and we saw that students were willing to accept and adapt to some of these new protocols that have been put in place for their health and our health. And as we saw a week go by and a second week go by, we realized that it is possible to do within the conditions that surround us. But it still is a very anxious space. Lots of changes that had to be introduced this year really affected the teaching practice and the pedagogy within the classroom and within the school itself. And as Dr. Silverstone said, physical activity, trying to find the place where physical activity falls in when, if they're in a phys ed class in the high school, they're only going to have it for 1/4 of the year. And so finding that breaks, and with the limited mobility or movement, which normally would be over lunch hour for junior high students or recess for elementary students, that's controlled a whole lot more too, to reduce the contact with other people for contact tracing purposes if in fact a case was positive within the school. So there is so many considerations, and then as teachers and educators and education staff is looking at saying, okay, on top of the physical safety of children and the entire community within the school walls, how do we also address some of those basic needs for mental health, physical health, and academic readiness? And so that's what we're working with. So I would say the anxiety is still high, but not we know how to do it currently.
Except it still only has been a month.
It's only been a month.
Yes.
And the sustainability is what sets in question too.
You know, the thing that's different about this is that so much of this is out of your control. You said you are at the beck and call, really, of what the guidelines are from Alberta Health. You told me a story about how you're trying to get sleep at night. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, it is difficult because as principals, we are actually on call now 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. If a case within our school population and the size of the school or the neighborhood it's in can directly affect the frequency. But if there's a case that's tested positive, the call comes to the principal, who then works with Alberta Health and contact tracers to put in all the measures to contact the families who had primary contact with the individual, and making sure that they're safe and that they go into self-isolation. So that all happens. So there's a number of hours of work that follows that call. So if it comes in at 9 or 10 at night, you begin that work and then you're up early in the morning to continue again to make sure families get the information prior to sending their kids to school that next day. And then families are scrambling to find out, what do I do for childcare? Many of their support networks are removed because grandparents, if a child's been exposed, doesn't mean they are infected, but they've been exposed. It puts a grandparent, who in many cases are that first call for childcare, to be very reluctant to jump into that situation. So parents are scrambling, trying to make a living, trying to go to work, but responding to this isolation order.
And one of the things that's important to understand is that, yes, there are inconsistencies because everything's constantly changing, but that everybody is dealing with this. This is not just one school, your school. This is every school. And they're trying to have some kind of consistency across the entire district or division.
Absolutely. And as Dr. Silverstone said, in Fort McMurray, the entire community experienced a trauma together. Yeah. Right now, the entire globe is experiencing a trauma together. So there is a sense of nobody knows how to do this. We haven't done this before. Anybody that may have been alive in the plague of 1918 is such a far memory with very different communication speeds. And so nobody has done this before. And with the opening and closing of businesses and the opening and closing of the economy, it's a complex problem with no simple answer. And so it's trying to do the right thing in the given circumstances.
And compounded because budgets were being cut before COVID-19 and haven't really been increased. So you're trying to do a double whammy of a job in a sense.
Absolutely, and to work with that too. And I know all school divisions in the province are struggling with how to best spend the resources. There was federal money that came, which was a blessing, in order to help offset the cost of PPE and sanitizer and any additional staffing costs that we incur. Our staffing, or our supply budget, our supply teacher budget, substitute teacher budget has to be increased, because if we are asking, because teachers go into self-isolation as well from exposure. So one student who happens to be infected and is at school can cause a isolation order for several teachers. So you might have one class go out, but you might have 8 teachers go out because each teacher taught that child in the 2 days that they might have been there.
One of the things that you said to me that really struck me is you said it's like living in a mental or a medical experiment.
Yes, it can feel that way sometimes because, again, the entire world are trying different things in the reopening of schools, and there's all sorts of limitations on gathering in all sorts of areas, whether it's restaurants or meeting halls or churches. But in schools are only built so big, and it's open for students to come. So when you have a school that holds 2,000 students or 1,800 students or whatever that might be, giving the choice to families to be either online or in person has helped eliminate some of the crowding, but there's no way possible to maintain the social distancing of 2 meters. So we're looking at all the other PPE to mitigate the spread of COVID.
Wow. Do you think that that people who work in education feel appreciated going through all of this?
And it's funny you asked. Just today, we got a call from a couple local businesses, Norwood Dental, and they were reaching out to all the schools in that area of the city and dropping off individually wrapped baked goods and coffee for all the teaching staff, because they said, we want teachers and custodians and support staff to know how appreciated they are by society. But it is interesting because there are so many people that are called to work, in a sense, a front line. And I don't know if school staff have been put in that category yet, in the sense of how people look at what we're doing. So, but in truth, we have teachers and education assistants and admin assistants and administrators with large groups of children every day. Knowing that whatever you're exposed to, you're taking home to your house. I had several teachers come to me in September, quite sad, because they had said goodbye to their parents until at least Christmas. Like, we can talk on the phone, we can Google Meet, but we won't be visiting, so you won't see your grandchildren, you won't see me, and just be healthy. And so that losing that physical contact with your support network can absolutely increase that anxiety that Dr. Silverstone was talking about.
Well, I'm going to move on just to
absolutely.
introduce our parents, because they're also very, very much affected by this.
And so important to hear from.
So important.
So important.
So we've got two parents with us, both in very different circumstances. First, I want to introduce Trish Saidler. And she's a stay-at-home mother of 3 high-achieving, very involved children, aged 10, 13, and 15. Welcome, Trish. When I describe your children as high-achieving, I meant very high involved. Give us a lay of the land with your family.
Well, there's my husband and I. I get to stay home with them, which is definitely beneficial at this time. My oldest daughter is 15, my son's 13 and 10. I have one in elementary, junior high, and high school. They're involved in competitive sport. My son is in baseball academy in St. Albert. My daughters both dance competitively 20 plus hours a week. So between living in Spruce Grove, school in St. Albert, all in St. Albert, dance, we're everywhere. Pretty busy family.
When this whole thing started, you wanted to homeschool everyone, but it didn't quite work out that way. What happened?
I did. Our choice as a family was to keep them home due to the fact that we were concerned about the new normal rules that were implemented, mask wearing, just the sanitizing. We just didn't think it was set up enough. We wanted to see what happened with it, was our personal opinion. And so we decided to keep them all home. Day before school was to start, our high school student, our daughter in grade 10, we received an email saying that she had to return to school, that they were not able to offer her any of her specialized classes. She's in advanced placement classes, plus she's working to write an exam to get her bilingual diploma in French. So none of those classes that she needed were offered online, so we had no choice but to send her back. And I've kept my other 2 at home to do online.
Well, and that's been really challenging for her. I mean, you said that she broke her back in 2 places during dance. And so what does that mean when you talk about 3-hour classes and no lockers? And what does that mean for her?
It's super, super tough for her. She's a very, we call her an old soul. She's a very resilient 15-year-old. But going back to school was something that kind of hit her out of left field. And when she got there, like you mentioned, she had broken her back a year and a half ago in 2 places, stress fractures. So sitting all day is super, super hard for her. And they're not allowed to get up and move around the classrooms. Bathrooms are very limited to certain times. And like I said, no locker. Like you said, no locker. She's got to carry her school world on her back all day. She comes home every day with a sore back, which then rolls out and interferes with her extracurricular activities as well. So it's been super, super hard for her to kind of adapt to the expectations, so to speak.
And as a parent, you said this has been a whole huge ball of stress. So many added things that you have to do.
Yeah, I didn't see it this way when everything started to roll out and we were given the options, return to school, online. I did not really, I wasn't prepared for the big picture because it is huge. I'm driving one to St. Albert she starts at 8 a.m. And then I've got the other two at home that are 2-3 Google Meets a day, different times, different subjects. Of course, we don't speak French, but our kids are in French immersion, so that's posed a challenge as well. And the teachers with that many kids are kind of stuck, right? Like the kids don't have access to them all the time either. So it makes it hard for the ones at home too.
Wow. You said that your kids you're helping them cope with this by getting them professional help. What does that look like?
Yeah, once COVID started and school shut down, I mean, my kids have been their whole lives. They started playing sports, honestly, at 2 and 3 years old. They've known nothing but a busy, productive lifestyle. And when COVID happened and everything shut down, they lost their world. They lost their friends, they lost school, they lost their activities, they lost seeing family, friends. It was huge. We started to notice a lot of anxiety with all three of our kids as COVID went on, as time went on, and then back to school. We started talking about back to school and just all the changes. We started noticing a lot of anxiety in our kids, which is something that was not a normal stay thing in our home for the most part, was that level of anxiety. But yeah, we've noticed all three of them kind of needed an outlet. It was getting to the point where, even talking to their dad and I kind of we don't have the answers. We know as much as they do. So, I mean, it's hard to help them move through that for sure.
Trish, you're able to stay home. Can you imagine what it would be like for parents who work?
Oh, man. I could not even. That's why I said we're super blessed. My husband's working from home as well right now. So we're super blessed to be in the situation we are, but there are a lot of people, a lot of other parents that I know that aren't in this situation, and like they've missed work. They've had to stay home from work 2-3 times already since school started because their kid, is sick and has to stay home. So I couldn't imagine being on the other end of things and not being a stay-at-home mom to begin with.
Wow. Thanks so much, Trish. We're going to come back to you in a few minutes. But finally, I want to introduce our second parent, Melissa Appleton. She's a professional photographer, a mother of 5, ages 2 to 19. The 2 eldest are her biological children. The other 3 are siblings, and you're in the process of adopting them. Melissa's also a member of CASA's Family Advisory Council, as all of her children have various degrees of mental health challenges and disabilities. So welcome, Melissa. Your kids kind of straddle all of the age groups of kids who are in school. Tell us a bit about your children and where they're at, what they're doing.
Well, we have a wide selection. We have a preschooler at home, and then we have our 5-year-old is going to Nature K in person, and then at home learning for standard kindergarten. Then we have a 12-year-old who attends a specialized school, a mental health behavioral classroom. And it's a very small school, thankfully only 18 kids or so in the whole school. And then our second oldest is in a mainstream high school program at a large high school. And our eldest is currently doing NATE programming with Inclusion Alberta. And it's at home right now, but we hear that probably next semester will be in person.
Wow. We hear about how challenging it is for other parents, but for you, you've got double and trippy whammies happening. First of all, for you, in some ways, this is a matter of life and death. You've got a 19-year-old, with some serious physical challenges as well, especially when it comes to COVID. What does that look like? Yeah.
The doctor, I remember saying, you know, he was 18 at the time, and he's 18 with the lungs of a 70-year-old. So that's kind of the magic number with COVID when they started talking about grandparents and the concerns about lungs. Well, that's all we hear is our 19-year-old has the lungs of a 70-year-old. My husband has diabetes. Our 5-year-old has serious allergies and asthma, and you know, just my mother lives with us. So it's left, right, and center, we're concerned.
So I can just imagine what the debate has been like for you, this whole, you know, physical versus mental health. I mean, how did you grapple with that? How did you deal with that?
Well, we didn't make the decision whether we would, in fact, send the kids back to school until the week before school started. There's always fear for parents of special needs kids sending them back to school on regular years. This year, everything was so much scarier, and trying to look at it from all angles, and not wanting to make the decision, wanting somebody else to make the decision, but we know that it's our decision and our risk to take.
Melissa, what about resources? You need special. Your kids have special needs. You need special attention for them. Are they getting it?
Well, yes and no. The funding was cut. Our 5-year-old should have PUF for this kindergarten year, and he doesn't have that because that was cut before COVID. The our CSD grant was canceled and redistributed. So people that we had on our team that knew our children and knew our family are no longer available to us and to so many other families. It's a very scary time right now for anybody who has extra needs. The public speech therapy and early intervention that we had been waiting for, we've gotten calls that those workers have been redrafted to COVID test sites. So we're out of luck unless we can pay privately. And even if you can pay privately, you're on long wait lists because everybody's looking at the other options right now.
Sort of brings up that whole issue that a lot of parents are facing, that if you don't have money, it's extra challenging because of the expenses that you have to incur with COVID.
Mm-hmm. No, most definitely. And there's other things like my nephew can't wear standard masks. He has to have a special material as he has autism, and he can't tolerate most masks. But my sister has found some that are $20 each, and so she has to go to the extra expense of buying these really expensive masks for him to be able to wear them in class.
Wow. What about the fact that, when sometimes when you're challenged, it's hard enough to be able to understand, to read people's expressions with a mask on. But if you have a hard time reading body language to begin with, that's got to be incredibly challenging for children with special needs.
It definitely is, and even for neurotypical kids, where my second son and my nephew went to a new high school this year, and they're walking down the hall, and normally you would look at the other students and maybe you would share a head nod or a smile and you'd stop and talk to somebody new. There's this division and this sense of hostility or unfamiliarity that isn't being gotten past because they can't give those subtle cues. You look around and everybody has this barrier. This mask is between you and both sides. You don't know, and so I think that it's made things a lot harder for our neurotypical kids, but as well for our kids that are having extra needs.
Wow, I'm going to open up the discussion to everyone, and I think I'm going to direct this question to begin with to our doctor. And that is, how do you normalize this whole balance of mental health versus physical health? It's something that every parent, every family, I'm sure a lot of teachers have gone through and are still going through.
Well, first of all, I think both of the parents have very difficult challenges, and the children who have both physical and emotional needs, and of course the two are so inextricably entwined, adds extra levels of problems, particularly at this time. There aren't any easy solutions. I think the key parts to this is to recognize that the children who have physical health problems very, very commonly have mental health issues as challenges as well. And also, of course, there's lots of children who don't have physical problems who also have mental health problems. And the third piece of this puzzle is that children who may not have a problem themselves, but are friends or family with someone who has a problem, are impacted by them. And so this isn't simply, okay, here you go away and do this, and everything will be fine. It's recognizing the almost concentric circles that one individual who is experiencing difficulty has impacts on large numbers of people, and it's not just that individual. But that also leads to ways in which you can potentially help, because the supports for people going through this are critical. One of the perhaps most impactful thing that happened in Red Deer that made a big difference was then when one of the children had problems and those problems were addressed, we found it really helped all the other children around them who were their friends, all the way from 13 through to 18. So one of the things is to help the supports for your child. If your child is alone, is there somebody else who can help support them? If your child has physical issues, is there a friend at school who they can at least relate to or give them support? And that support can be very, very helpful.
Have you been able to find those kinds of supports, either one of our parents?
I think that sometimes, yes, we have had to make the choice to prioritize mental health over physical health and expand our bubble. At first, we had a very small, we're all staying home and not leaving the house. Nobody went in and out, and we had to prioritize mental health and start letting people in, whether they be respite workers or family, extended family and close friends, and do the cohorts as things started to open up.
Has this become a new normal, or has it, have people started adjusting, or is this something that's getting worse? Is it getting better? What's your perspective? Would you like to answer that, Brad, from what you've been seeing in school?
It's hard to, in this 1 month in, it's hard to say whether it's getting worse or getting better. Yeah. But what I am seeing in many of our children, their resiliency to accepting some of these new normal, or not normal, but these new practices, understanding that. But there's lots of anxiety in and around what they're bringing home. And like you mentioned, Melissa, Inclusion Alberta as one of your supports, and it's so important that we keep everybody engaged, and sometimes it's difficult. Lots of parents have chosen to send their kids to school, even though they might be compromised in some way in the home or the student themselves, out of fear of losing the support. So they're making choices that the support for their child is more predictable in the school than the Zooming or Googling in the home. So they're making choices, again, for mental health over physical health. And so, which heightens the anxiety because, as you were saying, walking through the hallway, people walk by each other and there's almost a sense that everybody around you is infected, potentially. And so people are treating each other with a standoff nature. And you see that as well, as everybody is a potential spread of COVID, even though most people are very healthy. And so it's trying to adapt and adjust to that sense of victimization or villainization of others for no reason other than being present. And so it's trying to help the students and the staff and parents as well, that whole level of that kindness element, like how we treat each other is what's most important right now. Keeping safe and treating each other with that level of kindness. Think kindness first, and then things start to normalize in a better way. But I have seen a tremendous resilience as students are comfortable with their masks and comfortable with communicating through the masks. Would we rather not wear them? Absolutely, they're not comfortable to wear. But when I find in my community at school, when people understand that you're doing it because you care about the people around you, and it doesn't matter what you personally believe, it's what the people around you believe that matters, and you do it as a sacrifice for them, it really heightens the community in and around kindness and makes it into something that's okay and appreciated.
I know, Melissa, that was one of your concerns. Is you know, there are some people who they refuse to wear the masks, they refuse to do the social distancing, and that's a concern for how that impacts your family.
I wish I could put a mask on my children that could keep them safe, but I have to rely on others to mask as well to keep safe, because it's not enough to just get a mask for my children. It's we all have to work together to keep everybody safe.
There's also this thing with how COVID has kind of taken over from education. And one of the things that's come up consistently is that question of, are my children getting a good education still? Peter, would you like to talk a bit about that? And then Trish, I know you have some comments on that as well.
Sure. I mean, there's certainly one aspect. The other thing is I'd like to emphasize something Brad said, which is structure, and how incredibly that important it is to create structure. And I think about Trish and her children. They had a very structured environment in which they were thriving, and now the structure is very hard to maintain. And putting together new structures for the children to say, okay, this is the new normal, whether that's at school or at home or both, is really actually very helpful in terms of mental health resiliency for children. And I think probably that's what I'd like to emphasize, that one of the goals is to try and say, okay, how can I create a kind of safe, this is what things will be for the next few weeks, so that at least the children know what they're going to expect.
Trish, do you want to add your 2 cents?
Yeah, I do question the quality of the education, with my two at home online. I kind of got it cleared a little bit when, the doctor was explaining about, not, 20 minutes at a time focusing. I've been looking at it as, when they're doing 2 Google Meets that are half an hour each, how are they getting the same level of education as the kids who are in the classroom and receiving consistent instruction and education? It's really, really hard for me to see the
Can I just hopefully be a bit reassuring, Trish, because I think we need to look at, when we think about the brain and brain development, people's brains develop at different stages and different ages. And in fact, the brain doesn't fully mature till 25. And if you have a period when you talk about the quality, but really we're talking about the intensity of education isn't as great. That doesn't actually mean anything necessarily in the long term. There have been many, many examples of children who had to miss a year because of various diseases doing very well. And I think also we in this society focus too much on achievement. What are the grades at a young age? And I'll use myself as an example. I was a C or D student all the way till the end, because then I decided I'm actually going to work. My son did very similarly, and he's been publishing in Nature and Science since. So I actually am much more pragmatic and much less worried that if children miss a year, it's a bad thing. They're not missing a year, but they have a year of less intensive education. It's not bad. People will talk about learning other things and education in the broader sense. Now, I totally understand that our society focuses upon milestones. You have to learn X, you have to score Y, you have to do these things, and that some children thrive in that. But I think overall, I'm much more relaxed from a mental health perspective, and thinking, okay, they're going to miss this, than okay, they're not going to do as well. I actually don't believe that's the case. I can see the worry about it, but actually, I don't think the evidence supports that from the education literature. I'm quite happy to be. Should a principal disagree with me, that's fine. Who's obviously expert in this. In terms of the
No disagreement here.
No disagreement here, Brad said. One of the things that keeps coming up as well over and over again is that we have this expectation that when the pandemic is over, things are going to go back to the way they were before. But there were cuts and changes starting to happen in education before the pandemic that are continuing through the pandemic. We're just not paying attention to them. What does that look like? What should people be looking at? I
think it's really important to just pay attention to what's happening in with our ministry, choices that are being made around pedagogy and curriculum. And our government is responding to what they heard from parents and communities through the campaign, and so they're looking at that, and that is still on the table, those discussions. But I think it's really important that we all, I think through the pandemic, parents are more engaged in education because of the 3 months at home. We're very aware of what was and wasn't happening, and from March 13th through to the end of the year, we were really running at about 25% of the remaining curriculum based on what was outlined by Alberta Education. Mm-hmm. Now that we're into this new year and we've made choices between online or in person or some combination thereof, everybody's doing the full curriculum. So there's a higher intensity of it. And when I think about, Trish, what you were saying, in and around the quality of education, I do know many teachers that have opted to do online for personal reasons and just because they believe that all children deserve the access to a solid education or a quality education. But the delivery model is very different, and taking those breaks, and the students that are sitting in classrooms for 2.5 hours at a time, as Dr. Silverstone said, that physical break is so important. So we've been designing those body breaks at their desk so they can stand up without worrying about the moving around the room, but creating stretches and quick high-level exertion moments and stuff, just to keep that physicality going, because we know that's best for the brain, because we will lose focus quickly. And so building those breaks in a 2.5-hour class, chunking it into 20 minutes or half an hour lessons, and then take a body break, and then jump into a continuation or a new topic in the same class, really helps kids focus as well, because it's again addressing the sustainability of attention and to help that information sink in. Mm-hmm. But with all the restructuring, COVID, what's right for COVID, yes, and physical safety is not necessarily the best pedagogy. Yes. Like putting high schools in quarter systems where they have math 10, 10C in the first quarter of grade 10, and if this continues, potentially math 20-1 or 2 in the last quarter of grade 11, they could have gone for 14 months without a math class. So there's a lot of backfilling. We're also a lot of backfilling from what wasn't covered in curriculum in the last part of the school year. So everybody moved on, but they moved on with less than a full curriculum covered. Yeah. So we're addressing that at different levels, on top of the fact that students are always at different levels anyways. What I do know is teachers care passionately, regardless of how they're delivering it, and they're doing things that they've never done before. Most of the teachers that are teaching online didn't start this to be an online teacher. We do have some strong online programs, but we have so many teachers teaching online, administrators supervising online teachers, that none of us in our career thought we'd ever be doing or desired to do. Just like we have so many families at home that never desired to be at home, but under the circumstances have made the right choice for their family. And so everybody's doing it for the first time. Yeah. And for some people that heightens the anxiety with expectation, and things aren't happening the way they believe they should, so it creates a tension. But yeah, I just think it's really important that we offer up that level of understanding and gratitude and patience and grace in order to just help us all, parents, students, and staff, navigate it, because it's challenging. It's incredible. One might say it's impossible, and I've been doing a lot of reflection on that, and I want to take the M and replace it with an N and talk about what's impossible, what's possible within our current conditions, and really live with that as a thought. How can we do our best work in our current situation? So what's impossible?
Well, that's one of the wonderful things about being human, is that we're adaptable, and we will adapt and change and evolve as this goes along. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, particularly with our parents, is strategies and things that you've developed. You know, where do you go from here? What strategies have you sort of created to help you move through this pandemic with your family? Trish?
I know for us, like I said, we've connected with a therapist, had our kids talking to somebody on a regular basis, just making sure that they have connections outside of our family as well, outside of their immediate households, friends, teachers, friends, parents. We just want to make sure that no matter where they are in any situation, that they know that they can always find somebody, is kind of how we're navigating through this, is making sure they know that there's always people to talk to, and everybody's in the same situation at the end of the day.
What have you learned through this? Things that are making you're going to come out of this better as a family, for you, for your kids?
For us, it's definitely been, tolerance has been huge. I have my own stuff. I cannot wear a mask in public due to some PTSD stuff. And so my kids have learned how to tolerate people who have different views and different ideas about COVID in general. So that's a big thing that we've kind of learned and taught, is that everybody's going through the same thing, but everybody deals with it in a different way. And they have to be accepting of that. And, like Brad was saying, at the end of the day, you gotta be kind.
Yeah. Melissa, I know you've learned a lot. You're on the council, on the family council, and part of your mandate is going to be to help other parents as they navigate this time as well. What have you learned?
Well, definitely connection. We've put a priority on connection with our kids, and really working on their resilience and having that collaborative problem solving, so they know that they can talk to us and we can all work on this together, and really being kind and thinking of others, and there are certain roles we have to follow, whether it be at school or at home, or whatever routines and structures have had to change to fit this new normal, and having multiple plans, because we're living in chronic uncertainty. So we have to have multiple plans. So passing on that knowledge to others.
How do you see things, Dr. Silverstone?
I think that what we've experienced, unfortunately, is not going to end soon. And I think we need to recognize that and start to address the fact that we need to increase our resiliency. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's not going away immediately. Things have changed, will continue to change. And so I think we need to say, how can we help support our children and youth? How can we support our teachers and parents at this time? Structure, exercise, planning, recognizing mental health issues, and recognizing that changes the behaviors of the kids that you care about, and having some tolerance and adaptability, as both parents have said, to the fact that these changes are ongoing.
And you said there's going to be some opportunities as well for mental health. I mean, it's really brought that whole thing to the forefront. Maybe we'll start paying attention to it. Maybe we'll start actually implementing some of the strategies that we've been talking about.
I hope so, because I think, we often look for silver linings, not something anybody would want, but we are having a conversation about mental health that simply didn't happen on a society-wide level. And let's utilize that to really bring it out of the shadows, make people aware, and find solutions which we can then implement and adapt. So I think if there is a silver lining, that's what I hope it is.
Okay, some quick final words before we leave this conversation, because there's so many different things we could talk about. What would you like to leave this discussion with?
Well, I think something that came up with both parents and Dr. Silverstone is that sense of that calmness. Like, the urgency isn't as real as we make it. We have time to figure this out. And so to allow that time to happen as we process all these different stimuli that's coming at us, as we're responding to it in the moment. And when we drop everything for public health, because that will contain or slow the spread, it's going to have its toll on other things. We can't have it all. But we're sure working hard to do what we can to make sure our children and their families are safe, both physically and mentally.
It's very reassuring. Thank you for that. Trish, your 2 cents before we go?
Yeah, I think it's just super important for kids to have that consistency. I think is big for me, is something that I know mine have been lacking, is they hear something here and they see something here and then they hear another thing, see another thing. And that for my own kids has been quite the confusing situation. So for me, I would like to see more consistency come from the powers that be to the schools, from the schools to the parents and kids, and for maybe school boards to all kind of get on the same, somewhat on the same idea, or same, run with the same, somewhat of the same plan, I guess, at the end of the day.
Melissa, your final words?
I think just to try to model and to lead with gratitude and grace. We don't have all the answers, but we're all in this together and we're all working towards this new normal. And I think we'll have a very different world when we come out of this COVID pandemic than when we came into it.
Yeah, beautiful. Peter, I want to give last word to you.
I'm actually cautiously optimistic. While I think there are some unfortunate things that will happen, kids are pretty resilient. And let's focus on providing structures and supports for them and their family, so that as we go through this winter, we do all emerge better off, or at least as well off as we can possibly be. So I'm certainly cautiously optimistic and have some hope.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful panel. Much appreciate your input and your time. Thank you to Dr. Peter Silverstone, to Brad Burns, to Melissa Appleton, and Trish Saidler. Global's Your Mental Health with Peter Silverstone. Dr. Silverstone is going to be a guest on Global News morning for the regular feature, CASA Presents Your Mental Health. You can watch his interview at globalnews.ca. We also would really appreciate it if you would share your thoughts and your opinions and your feedback on this. There's a link in the description below this video, and it's a survey, and that's how we make these better, by getting your input on topics and what you'd like to see more of. And finally, I mentioned that CASA is a not-for-profit, and we appreciate all support. If you can provide a donation of any kind, that's appreciated. You just have to text CASA to 393939 for information on how to donate. On behalf of CASA, Child, Adolescent, and Family Mental Health, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next month. I'm Leslie McDonald.